This is Listen Up Home Buyers, the only podcast offering home buying advice and tips from true buyer agents. And now, here's your host, Victoria Ray Henderson.
My next guest for Listen Up Home Buyers is the owner and president of Buyer's Edge, an exclusive buyer brokerage in Bethesda that opened its doors 29 years ago. Buyer's Edge only works with home buyers and serves buyers in Virginia, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. My guest was one of the first members of the National Association of Exclusive Buyer Agents, or NABA, when it was formed back in the mid-90s. It is a real pleasure to talk to Stephen Carpenter Israel on the podcast. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, Vic.
Yeah, well, I think we need to give some background. So Steve and I know each other really well because my husband, Marshall, and I bought our house with Buyer's Edge back in, I think it was 1997. And I love the experience so much and the business model that when I wanted to switch up careers, I asked Steve if I could work with him, and he said yes.
And it's been great.
Yeah.
It's been good fun. And we've had Marshall for even longer. So
I know, 18
terrific.
years.
Yeah. It's been a lot of fun.
You know, Steve, obviously 29 years. I mean, it's been basically your whole real estate career, right?
Close. I actually kind of grew up in the business because my father was a real estate appraiser. And so I got my license, when I was right out of high school before I even went to college. So I've had my license for a long time, longer than I've even been doing the exclusive buyer brokerage business.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So
and
why?
I'm not even going to tell you how many years because it's just embarrassing.
Hey, you're still here. That's the good thing.
Right.
So why did you think of this exclusive buyer brokerage? I mean, it wasn't really on the map so much. It wasn't even on anybody's radar in real estate. What made you come up with thinking, I just want to work with home buyers?
Well, it was kind of an interesting ride for me because when I got out of college, I went to work in the commercial construction business for a number of years. Both working for a kind of a mid-sized company building, shopping centers and all this other stuff, and then on my own for a while. And I loved the construction business. And I was also, I still had my real estate license. So I was occasionally doing deals where I was helping people buy and I listed one or two houses when I was really young. And my wife, Wendy, was actually working in the real estate business as a traditional agent at the time. And in 1989 and 90, the commercial construction market just crashed and burned. And and we were, we had our first house, we had our first kids.
Oh God!
And we were, and we were in a position where, fortunately, I was able to look at other options. And one of my friends was buying a house in Colorado and using an exclusive buyer broker, and I'd never heard of it. And he kept calling me and asking me about this, how this would work. And I thought it was fascinating. And so I literally got on a plane about 6 months later and went out and met Barry Miller, who was one of the early guys in the business.
So what city was he in Colorado?
He was in Boulder.
And
I went out and met with him and just to kind of check it out because I thought it was so cool, and he had done a great job for my friend. And so, it was an interesting leap of faith, but I decided at that point that with my construction and real estate appraisal backgrounds, it just was a great fit for me personally to represent buyers.
Yeah. So when you opened your doors, what did other local brokerages think? I mean, did you have to keep explaining what you were doing all the time in every transaction?
Yeah, it was fun. It was quite a time because NABA was not even started, right? And so there was no national association. There was no kind of, there was no template for how to do this, and so we just knew that we thought it was a great idea, and we were just dedicated to the consumer side of it and to making sure that people got all the right information. And in a way, I think that, there was certainly a lot of pushback from other brokers in the area, but we were also, it was such a bizarre thing for them that they just thought that we would be a total flash in the pan,
right,
and be gone within months, if not a couple of years,
right.
And so they really didn't pay that much attention to us. And they were, and plus, my family had been in the real estate business. And so, and Wendy too. So people knew our names. And, So it wasn't like we were that, it wasn't like we were total fly-by-nighters.
Right, right. You had already been introduced to that all those people in the business, and you were
Yeah,
just kind of taking a different turn. I
yeah.
want to kind of dive into that just a little bit more. So, because to me that is like a critical piece of the whole idea of exclusive buyer brokerage. So why did you think it was a good idea? I mean, your friend was
Well,
out there in Boulder
it,
having
it, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because Wendy was doing traditional agency, we were kind of talking about the business a lot.
yeah,
And she and I and our friends who were all buying our first houses were just kind of, we were just amazed at how wrong it all seemed.
yeah,
That we were, we were just, everybody was basically being led down this path of, don't worry about who's giving you information or not giving you information or what's being, you just felt like something was always being withheld from you as the buyer. And at that point, all of our friends were buying; no one was selling anything.
right.
So,
Yeah, everybody was young,
so
right?
so we were all up against the same thing, and it just seemed crazy. And interestingly, a lot of my friends, because they knew that I had good basic knowledge, kept asking me to come in and look at their houses. No one was doing even home inspections at the time.
No way.
Yeah,
Are
and
you
so
kidding?
we no, and so we were, people were basically, it was really caveat emptor. It was
Wow.
absolute buyer beware. No one was giving you anything. There were no disclosures of any kind.
Wait a
And
second.
so
This is in the 80s
in the
or
in the early in really in 1990,
90.
just
Okay.
before we started. And so there was just kind of a shock. It was honestly, it was pretty shocking, and plus there was a lot of consumer movement at the time. People were starting to really dig into consumer issues.
Yeah.
And this one was just right in your face. If you were, you're 30
Yeah.
something, you're buying
Yeah.
your first house, you've got the babies, you're just like, what
Yeah.
is going on here?
Right.
And
Right.
so with all that, it just seemed like it made sense. And Wendy had been successful in the business, and we still had the wherewithal to basically start something new, because my construction business was still viable, although it was I could see the writing on the wall that the next
Right.
5 years were not going to be great. And so we transitioned and started the business together. And Wendy basically bailed on her traditional side and
Yeah.
came over right away, and we jumped into the business.
So, why do you think, because this business model, in my opinion, when I learned about it back in the late 90s, it's just so, I want to use the word pure because it's just kind of straightforward. It takes a no-brainer to figure it out. Why do you think, so often we get clients, home buyers who come to us because they've read a book, but yet the regular consumer who doesn't do their homework before buying a home, they don't know that NABA exists. Why do you
Yeah.
think, why is that?
Well, I mean, I think that it really goes back, it really is, you can point the finger at traditional brokerage firms because they have no interest in having the business essentially be split in two,
Right.
where companies would represent buyers and companies would represent sellers. But in theory, this is exactly what should happen. And is that, from a legal perspective, it's crazy that somebody can represent both sides of a transaction, or
It
one
is.
company can represent both sides of a transaction.
Right, right.
Lawyers aren't allowed to do it. Accountants aren't allowed to do it. No one does it.
Yeah,
It's just wrong on so many levels. And I think that, so I think that the National Association of Realtors is basically all, it was started by and run by companies that do listings, and it still is.
yeah.
So there's no motivation unless it was done on a regulatory level. There's no motivation for them to ever split up the business because they get both sides of the transactions on so many deals. It's still amazing how many deals go down that way.
I know. Hey, could you
Yeah,
just kind of break down first of all, Buyer's Edge serves people in Virginia, the district, and Maryland. I was
right.
working the other day with a young lawyer actually in the district, and he said, how many people do you end up with in DC as opposed to Virginia? And for people who don't know the geographic area, we are so close that frequently, in fact, I have 3 right now, we set up searches that cover, right inside the Beltway, Virginia, Maryland, and DC. And it's kind of it's kind of a flushing out of what works for the client as to where they end up.
Right.
But could you explain how what the difference is with representation in Virginia, DC, and Maryland?
Well, each jurisdiction, and it's true of basically all 50 states. I mean, everybody has all kinds of different stuff. And in Maryland
Right.
and DC, there are different disclosures. In Maryland, you have to tell people who you're representing, but you actually do that via having a contract. You must have a contract with your buyer client.
Mm-hmm.
So you actually have to have a contract with your buyer and a disclosure that says that the buyer knows that you're working for them. Well, I mean, this is like the biggest bunch of nonsense I've ever heard, because
Right.
the only person that really needs to know who you're working for is the other guy.
Right.
Right. And so in DC, where they actually have it right, DC basically says that if you have to disclose to the person you're not representing.
Right. Who you work
and,
for.
Yeah. And Virginia doesn't even basically have any disclosures because it's kind of a non-disclosure state. They don't have any seller disclosure forms. They don't have anything, but they do basically say that you should tell everybody who you're working for.
Right.
But it's a convoluted mess.
Yeah.
And interestingly, it's one of the reasons that, that nationally, it's appalling how few home buyers understand who their agent really represents, or the person that they're working for even represents.
Right.
And a lot of it is exactly for this reason, is because it's a convoluted mess.
Oh, I know.
Every state's different. But, I would say that the only people in the business who are able to get through that part of the process, the disclosure process,
Right.
About who's being represented and make it clear, is us.
No, I know.
I mean, everyone else is trying to explain how they can have 2 agents that sit right next to each other. They can be husband and wife. One can represent the buyer, one can represent the seller, and they can tell you that there's no, there's no problem.
Right.
And it's just nonsense.
It is nonsense. I mean,
nonsense. Yeah.
Could you also kind of talk a little bit about how, like in Maryland, a single brokerage can represent buyer and seller? What about the district?
Yeah, they can in the district too.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, they can have 2 people that are on the same team, 2 people that sit next to each other in the office, 2 people who happen to be in different offices of the same company, but one can represent the buyer, one can represent the seller. And so this is where it gets just really crazy, because everybody goes, well, that's not dual agency because the buyer is being represented by one agent and the seller is being represented by somebody else. And the point is that, and this is where the public doesn't understand it and is unlikely to ever really understand it, is that their contract, the buyer and the seller's contract, is not with an individual agent, right? It's with the broker of the firm.
Right.
It's with the company, and the person who's responsible is the broker owner, essentially, or the managing broker of that firm. And so the agents are agents of the broker. Excuse me.
Right.
The agents are the agents of the broker. They represent the broker. They don't represent individually the client. So they're agents of the firm. They're not even in a position to be able to contract because they don't have a license that allows them to. A lot of agents have only been licensed for a month or 2.
Yeah.
So they don't have the capacity to actually do the contract. Only the broker does, which means that the broker is representing both parties, and that's called dual agency. And so no matter how you split it up, whether you're allowed to do it, or you have to disclose it, or you don't disclose it, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's a mess.
You could see why, I mean, I look back on my own experience. You can see why people who are busy with their careers and busy with their children and all of these things, why this would just be too much. It's like, oh my God, okay, I give up. I give up. I'll just take whatever route is the easiest for me because
Right. And I think people could care less. A lot
yeah,
of times people are like, I don't care. I'm going with Susie.
right.
I'm going to go with Dave. I'm going to go with the person who someone else recommended, or I found, via, I walked into an open house and they seemed nice.
Right,
And
right.
so literally the public doesn't understand what the issues are. And arguably, right, there are a lot of very, very smart, very good, honest people in the business on every side.
Sure.
And
We work with them all the time.
yeah, we all do, and we feel like there's a good professional community and all of those things. But the problems are, the issues are when problems arise.
That's
And
what I wanted you to
so,
talk a little bit more about.
yeah, and so so we kind of have these kind of things that we talk about with clients, and it's not really to scare people; it's just to illuminate what some of the issues are. And so, when you're negotiating with someone, and their company is working on both sides of the transaction, and you're trying to get the lowest price on the best terms for the property, including, having inspections and doing all these other, doing all the due diligence stuff. And they're also representing the other side of the deal. Then they're in a position where they're already under contract with the seller to get the seller the highest price on the best terms.
Right,
And now
exactly.
that broker, is in the position where they're supposed to get the lowest price on the best terms for some buyer who's being represented by some other agent in the office. So
Right.
it's a mess from the
It
beginning.
is. It
But
really.
what does happen too is that not only are there issues about whose information are they going to disclose and whose motivations, your financial stuff. The bigger problems are really that if you've been working with an agent who's who does both. You've
Right.
been working with them as a buyer's agent. You've been working with them for months. They know everything about you.
Yeah.
They know exactly how far you're willing to go, how much cash you have, what you think about the whole inspection process, and how you're willing to, how far you're willing to go in a bidding war, and all of a sudden they get the listing that you want.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And then and then it's like, hey, by the way, I've got this new listing coming up, and
Mm-hmm.
if when I'll if you want to go see it, that's great. I'll let you work with someone else in the office.
Oh, and by the way, I know everything about you.
And by the way, I know everything about you. So,
Right.
that's a disaster.
It
And
is a disaster.
that's just one. But, some of the other ones are really interesting. Or, and this has happened, and as you know, it's happened multiple times in our office where, there's huge storms that come through in between the time when you're under contract and the time that you're going to settle the transaction, and a basement floods, or a
Mhm.
tree hits the house, or something bad happens.
Yeah. Or a sewer line erupts in the basement.
Well, and that that happened on one of my deals.
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
And literally, so the sewer line erupts in the basement, and there's 2 feet of sewage in the
Oh,
basement,
oh
and
God.
in a house that was basically pristine. And the brokerage firm representing the seller, they're basically taking the seller's position that my client has to buy the house, that
Mm-hmm.
they're gonna clean it up, and then my client has to buy the house.
Right.
And and essentially I'm explaining to my client, I say, well, there's no way that you have to buy the house,
Right.
because they're not selling you what you bargained for, which was a house that was in pristine condition and
Right.
never had a sewer backup.
Exactly.
And so you don't have to buy the house, and you should be able to get out of it, but you're going to have to talk to a lawyer. And of course they did, and eventually they got out, but it was awful.
Oh,
They
I
literally
know.
tried to force our clients to stay in a deal that
That had
was,
sewage in the basement.
yeah, and there was no way that the buyer was going to stay in the deal. But
Oh,
that was their
God.
responsibility. So you can imagine, right? You
Yeah.
can imagine what happens if
Yeah.
the so-called buyer's agent is also working for that firm.
Oh, I mean, they have a vested interest to keep you in the deal as a buyer
Not
because,
only that, they may tell you that you can't get out.
well, that's true. Right. Right. It's funny. I don't know if you remember this, but years ago when I first started working with you, you one day you were in the middle of some crazy thing, and I'm kind of watching you like, oh my God, what a mess. And you said, I can't wait to see you in the trenches in this stuff, And meanwhile, I'm watching you deal with this, going, oh God.
Well,
But
it is the trenches. I mean,
yeah,
we do. People think that most of the time nothing goes wrong, and
right,
but
right.
the truth of the matter is that I always ask my clients or the people that I'm meeting with, especially at the beginning, I'm like, so you came and you found us, this exclusive buyer brokerage firm. We're really happy that you're here. Did you do it because of, I'm sure you did it because of what? And a
Yeah,
lot of times the answer is because we've heard all these horror stories, right?
right, right,
I'm like, how many people do you know who bought something and something wasn't, was,
right,
something
right.
didn't come up that either raised the hair on the back of their neck or there was some real issue, I mean,
Yeah,
but whatever, we're basically the only game around where you're 100% sure that your client, your agent's going to represent your interest.
right,
I mean,
right. And,
no one else can offer you that.
yeah, I mean, we're the only ones who advocate 100%. I'll never forget there was a client who came in once and told me, a list of horrible experiences that this person had had with other agents.
Right.
And this person happened to be in the military, telling me, if I see another split level, and I'm telling him I don't want to see him, and then she turns to me and goes, "I'll shoot somebody." And you
You're
want to
like,
work with me?
yeah, you're like, I don't know if I need this.
I know. Well, it was so funny because when she left, he said, "Oh yeah, we'll work with you." Now she's a friend, but
Right.
when she left the office, Marshall looked over at me and said, "I'm kind of scared.
Right. Yeah. I don't know about this.
I don't know about this." But it ended up being a fantastic experience because basically she just wanted someone to advocate for her.
Right.
Just be
Exactly.
straight with her. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm talking to you February 2020. Can you give me a quick overview of what the market's like right now?
The market in DC is I would say it is impacted greatly by low inventory,
Mm-hmm.
and so it makes it hard for home buyers. Interest rates are low, so a lot of people want to be in the market, and they want to buy a house or move from one house to the next. But the fact of the matter is there are a lot of buyers out there, not a lot of listings out there.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I also think that the market is wildly divided between the properties that are accessible via metro accessible,
Yep.
walkability. These things are unbelievably powerful in our market where.
Yeah.
With a minute that you go outside of the Beltway or to places that aren't easily accessible to markets and public transportation and parks and recreation, the minute that you're in these kind of exo-suburban communities, it really changes.
Oh,
And
it
so
does.
you go outside the Beltway, and the market, which dropped down 15 or 20% or more in 2007, 2008, has never really recovered.
I know.
It's come back some, but
Yeah.
so many people don't want that product right
That's
now.
right. That's right.
Maybe it'll change. I mean, I think that it's quite possible that it will, but the drive for everyone is to be in town or metro accessible. And
Yeah.
so it's really the kind of haves and have-nots,
I know.
it's very, very different.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Some of our metro stations have a lot of parking. So that has been working with some of the people that Marshall and I work with in terms of like, okay, so we're not finding what you want right inside the Beltway where you can walk to the
Sure.
metro, but you can drive to, for example, the Glenmont Metro, which has 2 huge parking garages.
Right.
And if your company compensates for that kind of thing, it can offset it. But
Right.
it's really tough. Really tough.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that, driving to the metro is fine too, but I think that a lot of people are also, walkability has become something that just wasn't
I
even
know.
wasn't even on the register 20 or 30 years ago.
I know. I know.
I
And I
mean,
don't
people
blame
want to be
people.
able to walk to not just to something, they want to be able to walk to a lot of things.
Oh, yeah.
They want to be able to walk to shopping and just go for a walk and have access to, bike trails and walking trails and all this other stuff.
Yeah, it's just a quality of life issue. And
I think that there's just interesting things in the market today, and there's been a lot of hubbub about, what are deemed to be pocket listings, and it's problematic and something that the industry is trying to deal with. The National Association of Realtors is basically trying to get everybody in line with not selling properties in-house, trying to, without putting them out for public, to the public.
Right, which is the definition of a pocket listing.
Right.
For those of you who don't know.
Yeah, and so there's all these twists to it. People are, they're allowing people to put up listings in the multiple listing service and saying coming soon, but they're not supposed to actually let anybody into that listing until it's available to everybody. But the truth is that these kind of pocket listings and coming soon things are they're essentially ripe for abuse. And they have been abused. And I don't think that general public understands how damaging that can be. And so the pitch is, for a listing company is, hey, we have information on all these listings that come up in our office, and you'll have access to them before anybody else will.
And that right there, it's like, why in the world would you think as a buyer, oh, hey, that's a great idea. They have something just for me and only for me. First of all, it sounds like a fair housing violation.
Right. And also remember who they represent, right? They represent the seller. So they're inevitably, their objective is to get the highest price on the best terms. And you're not, and then it's not an arm's length transaction, right?
Because you're walking right into it.
They're feeding it right to you at a price that they may not even be contemplating that it's worth that much. They're just saying, hey, if you want to pay $1 million for it, go ahead.
Right.
And so, and you're right. And this is the issue that, that we've talked about in our office. And I think that is not out there as much as it should be, is that this also is absolutely ripe with discrimination, because you're essentially saying that the listing agent and that little brokerage firm gets to decide who sees the property and who doesn't.
And what is their criteria for that?
And what's their criteria? And the point is, even if they don't have any criteria, they go, well, we would tell anyone who's associated with someone in our office, we'd be happy to do that. Well, the point is that this is a little teeny office that's, that's all Catholic enclave, right, in suburbia. That in fact, they're not showing it to anybody of color, of anybody who's
of any other religion
with their firm, because they don't know anybody.
Oh, right? It's not
all
good.
Their clients just happen to be just like them. And so that's who's going to find out about those pocket listings or those listings that are coming soon, not anybody else.
Yeah.
And so, I just think that everybody needs to take a really, really hard look at, at what they're doing to the community by not allowing, public access to every listing that comes up. It should be widely disseminated. And I do think that the argument against doing that is that occasionally you have a client who's an ex-president or a senator or somebody who has an extraordinary art collection.
Sure.
And so there are reasons, right, that people don't want the general public to know that there are properties on the market, and they don't want people marching through their house. And I think everybody gets that. But if the listing brokerage firms are promoting that, and saying, hey, you don't have to have everybody come through. We can cherry pick the people who see your house. Then by its very nature, they're discriminating.
And they're not really serving that seller if they're not that sort of niche clientele that you just described.
No, of course.
I mean that's ridiculous.
Well, it's also, it's very interesting because, I can't tell you how many times, we've had clients who are very wealthy clients.
Right.
Who are from other countries, who are other, race and creed and color and religions, and they're ready, willing, and able to buy.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is that there are listings that they never found out about, because the listing companies were just keeping them to their own clientele. And it's horrible.
It is.
I hope that that this movement now by NAR to push for the elimination of pocket listings and try to tighten up all that is a really good thing, and I hope that they're successful doing it.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Well, I'm really glad you found some headphones so we could do this interview.
I had to go buy them this morning. I don't know what happened to my old ones. They just disappeared.
Well, Stephen Carpenter Israel, the owner and president, and of course broker of Buyer's Edge, an exclusive buyer brokerage in Bethesda. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you at the office later today.
Great fun. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Listen Up Home Buyers, the only podcast offering home buying advice and tips from true buyer agents.